Okay, good day, students. We will be wrapping up or look at the language variation theories. We're going to be looking at the accommodation theory and language style as audience design. Now, remember, we looked at the social network theory and we looked at the acts of identity theory. Now, with the accommodation theory and language style as audience design, they are quite similar. And so when we look at these two, you will see the similarities more than with the acts of identity and the social network theory. So remember, we are accounting for language variation. So naturally, you will see similarities. All right, so our style of speech changes based on the setting, the topic of the discussion or the discourse, and the purpose of the interaction, as well as the person we are interacting with. Okay, so these are some of the factors that will influence our change in the style of speech. Now, how do you speak to a child? How do you speak to an older person? How do you speak to a foreigner? Now, usually for a child, especially if it's a toddler, people tend to be engaged in what we call baby talk. And baby talk is really just mimicking the sounds. So if they say "wan baba," as in I want my bottle, then the tendency would be for new mothers, new parents, caregivers to accommodate and to say new "wan baba," right? So that's the baby talk, the goo goo gaga. But of course, we know that that is not recommended because we don't want them to acquire baby talk. We actually want them to acquire the English language or Jamaican Creole, whatever the language is within that particular speech situation. So I found these videos quite interesting, and this is actually what is recommended by speech therapists, that we use proper language. And when I say proper language now, I'm not talking about correctness. I'm talking about actual language as opposed to baby talk. Because again, you want the child to acquire the language of their parents or the caregivers. So let us look at some of these examples.
You're not about to be clapping your hands at me like that. I'm telling you, I fight kids. I don't hear it. I don't want to hear what you're saying. I don't hear it. But I didn't want to hear it first. I don't hear it. Why aren't you still talking? Only reason I'm talking because you're talking. The only reason I'm talking is because you're talking. Your mom. Yeah. I said it. I'm not. We've been going at it since this morning. I'm not gonna keep doing it. Stop clapping your hands at me. And you gonna keep clapping. Stop clapping your freaking hands at me. I know you better stop clapping, man. And you gonna do it again. I don't care. We've been arguing since this morning. We've been arguing for 12 hours. Why is you wait? You got school tomorrow. No. I gotta do it.
Did you understand it though? No. No. Okay. All right. Huh? Oh no, not this one. This is the grand finale of this. Okay, the last. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly what I was thinking. Oh yeah. Right. Don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. And then he was like, ah, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? But don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. 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 Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy. Right.
All right. And so obviously, you know, the father, the dad, he actually went viral with this video. He is opting not to partake in the baby talk because when we do that, as I said before, the child takes a longer time to acquire language. And for language acquisition practitioners, they recommend that you speak regularly to the child. So you notice that the child was obviously not saying actual words, but his mannerisms indicated that he was having a conversation with his dad. All right. So the question, how do you normally talk to children? We need to change that approach because we want them to acquire language early. And this is the approach that we should use. So we, the adults, tend to converge, as you will see when we look at the theory. We tend to do the converging to their speech, you know, so goo goo gaga, coochie coochie coo, and not realizing that the child is going to imitate us, right? And in doing that, there will be a delay if we do not present them with actual language. All right, so let us move along now to look at the focus of the accommodation theory. So this is the interpersonal aspect of speech diversity. And the essence of accommodation is that an individual can induce another to evaluate him or her more favorably by reducing dissimilarities between them, right? So you can actually influence someone to see you more favorably by sounding like them. Essentially, that is what it's saying. So let us look a bit further at the theory. So this theory was put forward in the 70s by Howard Giles and friends. And of course, with all theories, you know, they would have gone through several revisions to what it is that we have today. So communication is not only a matter of merely and only exchanging information about facts, ideas, and emotions, but salient social category memberships are often negotiated during an interaction through the process of accommodation. So we are negotiating relationships. We're not just exchanging information. So we're not just having that verbal transaction. We are also negotiating whether or not we like each other through language. All right. So let us continue. We are identified with a particular social group through language, and slight differences in speech are often detected by listeners and afforded social significance. So you should be remembering the linguistic variables, the marker, the indicator, and the stereotype, more so the marker and the stereotype, because remember we said that the indicator is a linguistic variable with little or no potent social information. So you don't really get any social information from an indicator such as schedule and schedule, all right? Therefore, we can understand that individuals should consciously or subconsciously seek or shun identification with others through language, because language brings with it social significance. It brings prestige, it brings power. And so if it is that we would like to exhibit these things, then we would change our language to do so. So accommodation through speech can be regarded as an attempt on the part of a speaker to modify or disguise his persona in order to make it more acceptable to the person being addressed. That's Giles and Pausland. And of course, the speaker may or may not be aware of this. So they may be aware that it might have been conscious that, yes, I want to sound like John Brown. And at other times, you realize that it's not, right? It's just based on a tendency to accommodate. The process, now the process of conversion, which is what we want to look at now. Convergence, the process whereby individuals shift their speech styles to become more like those with whom they are interacting. So when you adjust your speech pattern to sound more like the interlocutor, then this is known as convergence. So your speech is moving toward the speech of the other individual. All right. So people may converge their speech based on how they believe others in the situation would best receive it. And this explains why there is so much twanging, all right, or pseudo-American accents within the tourism industry, right? And I think I mentioned that when I spoke about the acts of identity theory. General expectations, people in subordinate positions tend to converge to those in superordinate positions. So this is upward convergence, right? So upward convergence is when you have a subordinate assimilating their speech to the speech of their superior. Okay, so boss and employee, for instance, you find that the employee would tend to converge upward. And the upward there comes from the fact that the boss would be using a prestigious variety. All right. Continuing with convergence. This strategy may include adaptation of communicative behaviors of a wide range of linguistic, paralinguistic, and non-verbal features in such a way as to become more similar to their interlocutor's behavior. So this includes non-verbal communication, gestures, facial expressions, right? Because you're converging based on the individual's overall linguistic behavior, all right? So how they're communicating, their pronunciation, for instance, the speech rate. So, you might want to speed up. So you're not changing your accent, you're not changing the words, but your speech rate is changing. So you want to check, for instance, Jamaicans living in Trinidad for a number of years, and you will hear the impact, because we know that the speech rate for Trinidadians, it's much faster than the typical Jamaican, right? And so you would find that sometimes you hear that change in the quality of the voice. Also, the pause and utterance length. So remember, these are paralinguistic features now, but they're important, right? Vocal intensity. So wherever the speaker would place emphasis, you tend to find yourself converging in that way as well. So it's not necessarily the language only, but the mannerisms as well. So accommodation does not mean that we are saying the same thing. Remember, you can say the same thing, but say it differently, right? So it is not the same as mimicking someone. It's identifying particular qualities within the individual's speech and then assimilating to those speech patterns. Now let us look at this. So remember we said that it's usually upward convergence where you have a subordinate who would converge to the speech of his superior. All right, so this is a clip, a very short clip from Smile Orange, and the waiters or the busboys, they're talking around the back, and there's a little lesson on how to sound like one of the tourists. So let us listen to that.
Now imagine that is more.
I'm trying to find
Can I
exactly
take
where
out
it is.
to see some
So he
Jamaican
was
night?
showing him a proper
Boss boy.
social etiquette,
Jamaica
right?
nice.
Because he wanted him to converge in that way as well. Now listen to the speech.
Now, only thing to finish up now. You hear right out around the back? Yes, sir. You know Jamaican? Yes, sir. Well, around the front is a different thing, you know. You have to check by them accent, right? Now we have English, Americans, and Canadians. Forget about English, they're too stingy. The Americans and the Canadians almost talk the same. So I want you to concentrate on the American and that look the Canadians, right? Yes, sir. No more that yet, sir. When the Americans say Saturday, they say, Saturday, man. Saturday. Well, let me hear you say that. Saturday. Saturday. Hmm? Saturday. Yeah. 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 You cotton picking son of a gun. You cotton picking son of a gun. Sock it to me, sweetness. Talk it to me, sweetness. Forget about the tongue. Play it natural. Yeah. Alright?
No. Why would he tell him to forget about the twang and just say it natural? So if you remember from the acts of identity theory, where we spoke about having adequate access to the group and having the ability to modify your speech as criteria for performing a successful act of identity. Likewise, with the accommodation theory, we saw that, you know, he wasn't able to accommodate successfully because of the speech impediment. So he has a lisp, right? So he was not able to say Saturday as he said it, or suck it to me. You know, you heard the lisp interfering in the pronunciation. And so he's like, listen, just say it how you normally say it, just say it natural, right? But he would have motivation. So we're seeing where we can use the acts of identity to analyze that clip as well as accommodation theory, because they were attempting to perform upward convergence. And as workers within that industry, they stand to gain quite a bit. So they would have that desire to converge, and that would obviously be a conscious decision to converge. So there are 4 social psychological theories that constitute accommodation: the similarity attraction principle, social exchange, causal attribution, and intergroup distinctiveness. So let us look at the similarity attraction principle. And so this theory basically says that the more alike we are, the more we will like each other. The more alike we are, the more we will like each other. So the more similar our attitudes and beliefs are, the more it is that we will be attracted to each other. Increased similarity is likely to increase attraction, intelligibility, as well as predictability. Okay, so the more alike, and if you notice friends, you know, they tend to look alike, or they have the same values, the same attitudes, and people gravitate towards people that would seem familiar to them, or that they have similarities with these individuals. All right, either in appearance, intellectual ability, etc. Through convergence, we can become more similar. So this is actually social psychology now. And so if you want someone to really be attracted to you or to be drawn to you, the theory is saying that you can converge to be more like them. Okay, you can converge to be more like them. And once that similarity has been established, then they will become more attracted to you based on these features of attraction, intelligibility, and predictability. Continuing with convergence, convergence might result in increased social approval. So remember, we said that with the busboy, the increased social approval, the reward would be greater tips, right? Or even if you think about the Oliver clip that we looked at when we were looking at communicative competence, the reward would have been to be served in a timely manner at the restaurant. So people are converging because they foresee or imagine or desire some type of reward from the target group, right? So convergence might result in increased social approval, and that might be manifested in different ways, as with the examples I stated. The greater one's need for approval, the greater will one want to converge, right? So again, going back to the clip, the smile orange clip, if he has a strong desire to get tips, right? Perhaps he has a financial goal, you know, he wants to buy a vehicle or whatever it is, wants to feed his family. That's a strong desire for approval because you want to be rewarded in the socially acceptable way, which is to get the tips. Now, moving on from the similarity attraction principle to social exchange. So convergence comes at a cost because it means that you are giving up something, you're giving up yourself or an aspect of yourself to sound like or to behave like another individual. All right. So there is loss of perceived integrity, especially when it is obvious that you're trying to converge, and loss of personal and sometimes group identity. So, you know, if you've ever been to any of the resorts in Jamaica, you again would observe how some of the staff interact with the foreign guests. And really, you when you hear them, you well, for me, you know, I automatically think, well, they are converging to get greater tips, you know, to get a good review, etc., just to be liked by the the guests, right? And then you think that, whoa, their personalities it's lost because they're not being themselves, right? Because when you hear them talking amongst themselves, then you, of course, you hear the Creole coming out. So social exchange theory states that prior to acting, we attempt to assess the rewards and cost of alternate courses of action. So we're thinking about the opportunity costs. What will I be getting in exchange for giving up a part of my identity through convergence? Engaging in convergent speech acts should then incur more potential rewards for the person than punishment. So there has to be greater potential rewards, like the tips, for instance, than being punished in some way or being insulted in some way. So some tourists would actually say, well, you know, are you Jamaican? Speak Jamaican. You know, me want to hear how you're talking Jamaican. You know, they would try to converge to our speech. And here it is that they're trying to converge to sound like Americans. All right. And remember, again, with the social exchange, during the conversation, you heard, you know, the busboy was saying to him that the waiter was saying to him, let's not worry about the British because them mean, and the US and the Canadian, them sound the same. So I could try sound like American. So that would be them assessing the rewards, you know, so the British, they're mean, so we're not gonna try to sound like them. But the Americans and the Canadians, they will tip you. So let us try to sound like the American. All right. Making predictions. So what would happen? Let's say there is an industrial dispute in a small firm where there is a great need for the employer to win over his workers, right? Now you might have what we call downward convergence, because in this case, the employer is trying to win over his workers. So at this point, he's not going to be using the prestigious form to speak with his workers, right? Likewise with our politicians, when they go on the campaign trail, them not sound like how them sound in a parliament, because they're converging to the speech of these potential voters. And at that point, the votes matter. And so if the votes matter, the people who will vote, they matter. And so they will converge. A job interview in which a male applicant has a less prestigious accent than his interviewer. Of course, the male applicant will attempt to perform upward convergence. Now, under social exchange, we talk about language ideologies. So I mentioned before that some accents, some language varieties are considered to be more prestigious than others. All right, so you would evaluate the context and then determine what is prestigious and what is required within the given context. Now, in England, received pronunciation or RP speakers are viewed as more intelligent, self-confident, and determined than regional accented speakers. Right? And of course, the answer is here in terms of the applicant would converge to the interviewer, who would then be attracted. And remember, we're talking about attraction now in the psychological sense, right? Would be attracted to the applicant. And perhaps that act of convergence would work in his favor. So in talking about received pronunciation, right, there is the ideology, that there are additional rewards for women when they use the received pronunciation. So the received pronunciation is what you hear on BBC, for instance. All right. So this is the standard British accent. So RP accented women are stereotyped as more competent, less weak, more independent, adventurous, and feminine. All right, language ideologies. So we have various perceptions based on the language use of the individual. And it says this may explain why women in the US and Britain adopt more prestigious sounding speech than men. So some time ago, I mentioned this where I said it's a sociolinguistic universal that women tend to use the more standard and prestigious form than men. And this is the theory was put forward that because women gain power from their appearance and identity, including language, then they have to use the standard, whereas men, they gain power from wealth, what they have, so they don't need to use the standard. All right, so that theory was put forward in the 70s by Peter Churchill, so bear that in mind. All right, but he's basically saying that women tend to use the standard more than men because that's all they have. They just have their beauty. They just have their speech. They just have their etiquette and their mannerisms, whereas men have wealth. Stereotype, but there is some truth to it. All right. Now let us look at this clip from My Fair Lady, highlighting the importance of the received pronunciation for women to actually be seen as feminine. So the professor, he's working with Eliza, and there was actually a challenge for him to turn her into a duchess, I think over a time span of 2 weeks. All right. And he had to address not only her social graces or lack thereof, but also her speech in terms of pronunciation. And Eliza uses the Cockney dialect, but he's trying to get her to use the received pronunciation or the RP accent. So let us look at that clip highlighting, just the importance of women being required to use the standard. So this comes under social exchange, which comes under the accommodation theory. So let's have a listen.
All right, Eliza, say it again.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
Didn't I say that?
No, Eliza, you didn't say that. You didn't even say that. Now, every night before you get into bed, where you used to say your prayers, I want you to say, the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain 50 times. You get much further with the Lord if you learn not to offend his ears. Now for your H's. Pickering, this is going to be ghastly.
Control yourself, Higgins. Give the girl a chance.
Oh, well, I suppose you can't expect you to get it right the first time. Now, come here, Eliza, and watch closely. Now, you see that flame? Every time you pronounce the letter H correctly, the flame will waver, and every time you drop your H, the flame will remain stationary. That's how you'll know if you've done it correctly. In time, your ear will hear the difference. See it better in the mirror. Now, listen carefully. In Hertford, Hereford, and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen. Now, repeat that after me. In Hertford, Hereford, and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen.
In Hertford, Hereford and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen.
Oh, no, 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 no. I don't know here at all.
Shall I do it over?
No, please. Start from the very beginning. Just do this. Go, ha, 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 ha.
Ha, 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 ha.
Go on, go on, go on.
Ha, ha, ha.
Does the same thing hold true in India? Pickering's peculiar habit of not only dropping a letter like the letter H, but using where it doesn't belong, like hever instead of ever. Notice that Slavs, when they learn English, have a tendency to do it with their G's. They say linger instead of linger, and they turn right round and say singer instead of singer. Notice the Slavs, when using it where it isn't needed. They learn English, they have to do it with their G. The girl, Higgins. Go on, go on, go on, go on.
Poor Professor Higgins. Poor Professor Higgins. Night and day he slays away. Oh, poor Professor Higgins. All day long on his feet, up and down until he's numb. Doesn't rest, doesn't eat, doesn't touch a crumb.
Again, Liza. How kind of you to let me come.
How kind of you to let me come.
No, kind of you, kind of you, kind. How kind of you to let me come.
How kind of you to let me
No,
come.
no, kind of you, kind of you. It's like cup of tea, kind of you. Cup of tea. Say cup of tea.
Cup of tea.
No, no, a cup of tea. It's awfully good cake, this. I wonder where Mrs. Pierce gets it.
First rate. And those strawberry tarts are delicious. Did you try the plain cake?
Try it again.
Did you try the...
Pickering! Again, Eliza.
Cup of tea.
Oh, no. Can't you hear the difference? Look, put your tongue forward until it squeezes on the top of your lower teeth. And then say cup.
Cup.
Then say of.
Of.
Then say cup, 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 of,
Cup, 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 of, cup, cup, cup. Of.
By Jove, Higgins, that was a glorious tea. Why don't you finish that last strawberry tart? I couldn't eat another thing.
Oh, I couldn't touch it.
Shame to waste it.
Oh, it won't be wasted. I know somebody who's immensely fond of strawberry tarts. Cheep, 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 cheep.
Ow!
All right, so that type of systematic convergence was not working for Eliza. And if you noticed, Professor Pickering, he started pronouncing some of the words like Eliza. So when he said plying, you know, he realized that he was converging to her speech. And in that case, it would be downward convergence because the Cockney dialect is considered to be less prestigious or not even prestigious at all in comparison to RP. All right, and then we have causal attribution. So do we perceive all speech conversion as favorable? Very important. We interpret others' behavior and evaluate the persons themselves in terms of their motives and intentions. So an individual may converge, but it is not seen as favorable. All right, so for example, full convergence from L2 learners or native speaker-like fluency is often considered with distrust and seen as controlling by the addressee, right? So that is using the L2 learner learning or speaking the L1, if they do full convergence, as in they're converging everything, speech pattern, speech rate, words, everything, then the addressee will begin to think that something is wrong there, right? Because how it is that you're able to, we know that that is not your first language, but how is it that you're able to just to converge in all aspects like that? So it's not considered to be genuine, and as a result they will question the motive of the person performing the convergence. So if a speaker is known not to have the necessary communicative competence and has been distracted by a close and recent bereavement, their non-accommodative stance could be excused, right? So there are times when non-convergence would be quite acceptable in a situation as described here. Causal attribution continued. Although interpersonal convergence is generally favorably received and non-convergence generally unfavorably received, the extent to which this holds true will be influenced by the listener's attribution of the speaker's intent, meaning the listener would determine if the speaker is actually being genuine in their convergence. And then from there, they would decide whether or not to reward or punish that speaker. So 3 factors should be taken into account in making inferences and ultimate evaluation. 1, the other's language competence. 2, the effort he or she engendered to converge, and the external pressures impelling the speaker to act in a particular way. Non-convergence. So there are times when individuals will opt not to converge, and they're also communicating an ideology by not converging. Now, the speaker may want to maintain their identity and cultural distinctiveness. And in certain situations, people may not only want to maintain their own speech style, but wish to emphasize it in an interaction. So divergence is when the speech would shift away from the interlocutor's speech style. And this is known as speech divergence. So instead of converging and moving your speech towards the speech of your interlocutor, you move your speech away from the interlocutor, and this is called divergence. So divergence sends a message that the speaker does not value or require your approval. And just to go back to maintenance, right, where you want to maintain your speech style, we can think about Martha's Vineyard and the islanders there, and the fact that they wanted to emphasize a particular pronunciation because of the influx of tourists or non-islanders, they call them mainlanders, on the island, and they wanted to remain distinct. And so instead of converging to the speech of the visitors, they maintained their own speech style and ended up emphasizing particular pronunciation styles. And this eventually led to language change. So when we look at language change, we will see how divergence and maintenance can lead to language change. All right, because it created a whole different type of phonology within their language system, simply because they did not want to identify as mainlanders and they wanted to maintain their cultural identities as fisher folk. All right. And then finally, under the accommodation theory, is the intergroup distinctiveness. So distinctiveness within and across groups. So when members of different groups are in contact, they would compare themselves. Intergroup comparisons will lead individuals to search for and even create dimensions on which they can make themselves positively distinct from the outgroup. Again, thinking about the Chimark fisherfolk on Martha's Vineyard. Speech style is important to clue to group membership. Therefore, speech divergence would be an effective strategy for making oneself psychologically and favorably distinct from outgroup members, right? So during the summer, they had the visitors basically invading the island as they saw it, and to remain distinct from that group, they performed maintenance, right? So a phenomenon similar to divergence is maintenance, whereby an individual persists in his or her original style, regardless of the communication behavior of the interlocutor, because at this point, they want to show disapproval with the influx of these islanders coming, the mainlanders coming on to Martha's Vineyard, and also to maintain their cultural distinctiveness. And so they decided to just perform maintenance to highlight the speech differences. So in conclusion, the accommodation theory in the study of language variation helps to explain how individuals vary their speech according to their interlocutor and gives useful insights into the tendency for different varieties to evoke or trigger different perceptions of their speakers. So I want you to think about different situations in which you have actually performed any aspect of the accommodation theory, whether it be convergence, divergence, or maintenance. So divergence is when you want to, for instance, you are in the classroom and a student approaches you and say, Miss or sir, I can't go on with yourself, say just go on with yourself. So they are using Jamaican Creole with you. And in your mind, you think that it's inappropriate. So to signal your disapproval, you diverge by using English, even if you normally use Creole with them. So, excuse me, are you actually speaking with me? That's divergence. And then maintenance is where you don't change anything about your speech. You just maintain your speech style in the midst of other styles within the speech situation. All right, so that's it for the accommodation theory. The next theory and the final one will be language style as audience design.